applaus for me.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's our pleasure. Really happy to have you, and really excited to have this chat with you, since it's been so fun preparing this interview with you.
Likewise.
I wanted to start a little bit with your background. Don't get in the plant. Tell me a little bit about your background, what you were doing before joining Trainline.
Where to start? So I'm from Hamburg, and what's quite interesting, so in Germany, beautiful city, can really recommend that to you. And there are a lot of fans around here that love Hamburg, which is good. Why am I saying that? Because in Hamburg, it's the second largest harbor or port in Europe, actually, after Rotterdam. And I've always been in that spirit of transportation and logistics. You see the big vessels leaving the port, and you just wonder what is happening behind the scenes. And then I did my school in Hamburg, and at one point I thought I want to do something with transportation and logistics, but not only from a tech perspective, but also from a commercial perspective. And then I thought, okay, what am I going to do with that? And I studied in the beginning business administration, economics, like almost everybody, because I thought, well, at least I won't do anything wrong by choosing that. And then at one point I realized this is a bit too abstract and a bit too global. If I know what I want to do, I have to do something with it. Then I went to Montreal, and that was really interesting for me, and studied transportation and logistics. What was really interesting to understand that Canada is actually way behind us in many, many things when it comes to logistics and also to transportation. For example, what I understood, it was in Montreal. And Montreal, in order to get away from the city, you have to plan long in advance, because there are flights, they are often full. The next city is Toronto, it's 9 hours away, or 8 hours. There are 3 trains, it takes you 5 hours to get there. So I came back and actually felt, and also it was a very proactive decision to come back to Europe, because we're just so privileged by the way that we live. And train is an important part of that, but also transportation in general, right? You go to any place, there's a train every hour. And this is just great. So I then went back and finished my studies in Dresden, which is a technical university. So I did part tech, part commercial, and did a major in aviation, because I wanted to do something international, and for me, international was aviation. Then I started working with aviation, and it was an interesting experience, but I felt I couldn't make much of a difference, really. So I really felt that it is good to be there, and it was kind of what I expected, but I felt that whenever I came up with a great idea, I felt they had already done that. And so for me it was difficult, because this is what I wanted to do, and then you do that and you think like, okay, what are you going to do now? And then I learned by accident that the German railways, Deutsche Bahn, that they were opening up an international department. It was pretty small at times. And I thought, okay, Deutsche Bahn, international, how does that go hand in hand or together? And then I started there, and I realized that it actually is quite international and has become more and more international. It was the time when Deutsche Bahn also acquired a lot of international companies, and with 350,000 employees at times. But in the department that I was in, I was one of very few people who spoke English, for example.
Wow.
So something that, is completely normal in many other companies and in many other businesses, but there it wasn't. And as that, I kind of climbed up the ladder in terms of hierarchy in the international department. And at one point I was sent to Paris to run the Paris office at DB France and the region Western Europe. And that was quite an important step. I was 29 and was the CEO of that part of the company. So there was a lot of discussion around that. Well, you're way too young. I had to run through an assessment center, obviously, and stuff, which was also probably important for the credibility. But I did that for 5 years almost. And at one point, we're probably going to come to that in a second, I joined Capitaine Train.
And how did that happen? How did you discover the company?
So when I came to Paris, that was in 2011, I read an article about Capitaine Train. And in all honesty, all that startup world and everything that, that was a bit different from these big companies, in my mind wasn't very present. Because in Germany at times, it really wasn't a big topic. And to be honest, it's still different than here. It's coming and it's developing, but it wasn't that far. And even in Paris, to be honest, it's 8 years ago. It has been very, very different. I mean,
yes.
You know all about that, huh?
Yes.
You just said you were the first employee. Today, Paris, a startup scene without the family, for example, would be hard to imagine. But at times it was like that. So I read an article about Capitaine Train, and the three founders, so Jean-Daniel, Martin, and Valentin, they described a platform of taking the train. And at times it was ruled that SNCF had to open up their sales channel in order that others could sell them as well. And they imposed that, and they got a contract, and they started selling SNCF at one point. And I reached out to them, and the way I reached out to them, I sent an email to info@capitainetrain, je pense même FR. I'm not sure, might be .com, and I asked them how they felt about coming to my office and talking to me, because I felt it would be absolutely amazing if there was a platform to combine French rail with German rail.
But you're leaving something out, something you told me when we met, that you thought they were...
Oh yeah, right. When I met them, they came to my office. Great, three absolutely amazing people, obviously. But it was just so interesting. I was suited up, right? They had to go by my secretary, by my assistant to come to my office. I had that amazing office, in Paris, super representative. And then three people my age came in, I think in a t-shirt. Probably had some cartoon on it, I don't know. But, and we had that discussion. And at one point I realized, okay, they are absolutely smart, and what they are doing is exactly what is needed, which is really interesting, because obviously I had similar discussions in the railway industry with SNCF, with DB, but they hadn't yet understood the complexity. And I think this was good.
Yes, so one of the things we say a lot at the family is that some of the best qualities of first-time entrepreneurs is the fact that they're naive. And we like to say incompetence, but people don't like to say that much. But the fact that you don't realize how hard it's going to be beforehand allows you to take bold decisions and make bold moves. So they were young, and they really had this ambition to make this product the most amazing one, and you were attracted to that, I guess.
Absolutely, because I felt customers more and more just travel across borders, and they don't care that there are borders, and they just want to get the best ticket. They want to have entire transparency, and they don't care that there's Deutsche Bahn or SNCF. Why would they care? They just want to go from a point A to a point B. And to be honest, outside of Germany or France, nobody knows what that even is. And to be honest, do they have to know? No. They just want to go places. And I thought this is exactly what we need. And so what I suggested them is to connect them to Deutsche Bahn. And in the beginning, they were looking at me like, that's a bit odd. SNCF is trying to sue us more or less for doing what is law. At times, it was very different than today. Today, we have a great relationship with them. And then Deutsche Bahn comes to us and asks us to connect. That doesn't make any sense. And then I explained it to them, and it worked. And to be honest, it went super, super quickly. Within, I think, not even 5 months, they were connected. And then they built for the first time that platform that allowed to combine SNCF with DB. And not DB, not SNCF managed to do that. So absolutely amazing.
So just paint the picture for us. Back then, basically, if you wanted to look for a train ticket on, going from one place to another, you would have to go right to each website for every provider to get a separate ticket. So there was no single platform unifying all that offer.
And it's still the case.
Yes.
So absolutely. Yeah. So if you wanted to do, let's say, Paris-Frankfurt, you probably went on the, at times, Voyage SNCF, today we.SNCF website to look into that direction. And if you wanted to do the other way around, you probably went to bahn.de or bahn.com, not knowing that there are two different price systems and that you do not automatically find the best price. But as soon as you leave Paris, let's say on the French side, and Frankfurt on the other side, you didn't find any tickets. You had to combine them yourself.
But you guys that's your mission, right?
Exactly.
You're very close to you're the biggest platform.
Exactly, we're the biggest platform. We're the world leader for that. We have 220 carriers now connected, which is quite an achievement. And we're present in 45 countries now, with
Amazing.
Supply, and we're selling to 173 countries. So quite exciting.
Amazing.
And at times it was France.
Yes, and let's not get ahead of ourselves. So you talked to Daniel and the team, to Jean-Daniel, sorry, and at what point did you say, this is the right company for me, and join them?
I think what Jean-Daniel and me always had in common is trust. I think the two of us, we function in the same way. We're very different in one way, but also very similar in some other. I think we have very complementary skill sets, but we believe, for example, in the quality of people. We believe that if you hire the right people, that makes all the difference in the world. And obviously, you need to have a good idea, and you cannot be completely ignoring reality. But if you have a very, very good team, that makes all the difference. So that was one of the things that we had in common. And then, when I say trust, is also obviously there were situations where just being in our positions, we disagreed. I remember at one point he said, no, I want to have this ticket and you need to make it available to us. And I said, I might agree with you personally, but in my role, I have to say no. And we still had a lot of respect. And if you go through this kind of these cycles and you still know you can trust the other person and you can still have a lunch together, and then at one point, you feel how the other person is wired. And then at one point, Jean-Daniel and me, we had one of our regular lunches, and I told him a bit that I could imagine to move on. And to be honest, I wasn't thinking about working there at this time at all. And he said that he was thinking about restructuring Capitaine Train, and that two of the founders wanted to leave. And then we talked about it. And what's interesting is we talked about the project, but obviously the project I knew, and he knew that I knew. So we talked really more about, we talked about people, we talked about organization, we talked a lot about culture and a lot about value. And it just worked that the two of us, we just had the same ideas how to do that. And then what happened is we shook hands, because that was before the B series, so I wasn't even sure that we had the money, and I resigned. Because I had 6 months notice. And I resigned without being 100% sure that this worked. But once again, I know that when Jean-Daniel and me, we shake hands, then it's a done deal. And that was enough for me. And here I sit.
Yes, that was obviously a good decision. And then how was the transition from Deutsche Bahn to a startup, basically?
Quite challenging. Once again, 350,000 people. I was the 27th employee. And not only that, I was also the second non-French employee in the company, so that was quite a change as well. I remember my first couple of days, because if you work with so many brilliant people, and everybody is an expert, because in the beginning you only hire experts to an extent which is unbelievable, right? Because you don't have masses to treat yet, you don't have volume to that extent, so everybody is really a specialist and still building exclusively something in this particular matter that I thought in the beginning, what can I actually bring as a value to this company? And then it was interesting, we started talking a lot. I spent my first 2.5 weeks, I think, just talking to people and trying to understand, trying to learn. But I think my first reaction was being extremely humbled and extremely grounded and asking yourself, okay, what is it where you can add value? And then I think what I understood is that I think 25, 26 is the first kind of limit where something changes in terms of culture. And then we talked about that slightly because I think you're 50 now. I think 45 is the second one. And and then I realized that there is something that I could add, I guess. Now it's always hard to judge on oneself, probably more around organization to structure things than obviously because of my context to bringing new carrier contracts and stuff like that. But it wasn't easy.
I find it so, you're so humble to say that. Obviously you can't say I'm humble, but I think you're humble. To say as someone who had so much experience in the train industry to come to a startup that does train ticketing and said, how can I add value? That's I really think that that's one of the best qualities in a leader, to have the humility to say, how can I bring value all the time? And so in the beginning, your role as COO, what were the first projects that you worked on? What were the first things that you worked on back then?
The first bigger project, so perhaps if we start from an organizational, cultural side, was to make the company more international. And this was one of the things that Jean-Daniel agreed on from the beginning. We always said we're very proud to be in Paris, and we're very proud to be Parisians, whether you come from Paris or not. But this cannot be our business concept, and we cannot limit ourselves to France We cannot limit ourselves in terms of growing by doing everything in French. Everything was documented in French. The language of the company was French. And I dared to do, I think from the very beginning, all meetings in English. And in the beginning, people were a bit annoyed, not all, but some. Then some kind of started to ask questions in French, and I then stayed, pretty clear that the answer will be in English because
you spoke French.
Because
at the time,
I spoke French. My English was and is still better, but still we could have done it in French. But the most important thing is that if you do that, first of all, you start changing in terms of how you see the world, and that you just think more internationally. You open up to international people, which is really important.
Yep.
And thirdly, we also started documenting a lot of stuff in English. And therefore, when new people arrived who weren't French, they could benefit more. Then the second thing was organization. That there was no organizational chart. The word doesn't mean anything. But when you grow a business, and especially when it becomes bigger, you need to make sure that the information, the flow of information works right. It doesn't work that you say, okay, everybody speaks to everybody, and we're all having lunch around one table, so everybody knows all the information. That's an absolutely luxurious situation, yeah? And believe me, it would be great if that was always the case. It would spare me a lot of time. But that's not reality, right? You need to make sure that you understand what's going on in the business, obviously, and therefore that you receive all the information that you need to receive. But more importantly, the way that I see leadership is I'm a service provider to the teams. I always say probably the teams would be doing more or less just fine without me. I would be nothing without the teams. So I think it is important to see it that way. And just as an anecdote, Jean-Daniel and me, the first organizational chart that we showed was Jean-Daniel and me at the bottom, and then the team up. Why is the leader always on top?
Makes no sense.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it's more about that culture and that thinking around it. But, and this was very hard to put across in the beginning, you do need an organization. And you don't need an organization for hierarchy. You need an organization to make sure that the flow of information is ensured, that people, in order to be able to do their job more or less, that they have everything that they need. But on the other hand, and this is quite challenging, we're probably going to talk about that a bit more later, that people also need to almost accept that they don't have all the information anymore. Because obviously, when you eat around one table, you know what everybody is working on, right? There is a small stand-up in the morning. You can do that with 30, even with 40 people. At one point, you can't do that anymore, because otherwise you spend your entire day in the stand-up. But everybody was aware of everything that was going on.
Yeah, I think the modern version of that is that you discover there's a Slack channel that you're now part of. When you open it.
Very good point, absolutely.
Yeah. But that, going back to that international, because it's a big pain point, I feel, in French startups. You, at the same time, you want to open up to international talent, but the international talent is not there yet. So it feels kind of silly to talk to each other in English where there's no English person in the room. How did you make sure that, that actually took place? How did you make the environment more welcoming to international people?
Well, I agree with you, and therefore what we try to do is very quickly to also recruit more international people. So we recruited country managers very early, because what I felt at one point, you need to be careful, by the way, no matter what your position is in a company, that you don't carry too many hats. So I was the guy who brought a new supply, so who made the deals with the carrier, but I was also the CEO, and I was also the international guy. And I felt that international guy, that shouldn't be me, because that doesn't make any sense. So we recruited international people. We recruited people into the company who wore that hat. So we recruited very early an Italian. He spoke French, but he was Italian, and he still is. By the way,
the Italians, we have some Italians in our team. It's kind of a cheat, because they're like, most of them, a lot of them speak French, but you can say they're international. They are, anyway.
Well, he was born and raised in Italy, and he really helped. He really helped on that. And then, quite interestingly, so today, if I'm not mistaken, even in the Paris office, 1/4 of the people are not French anymore. And once again, I think, to be honest, in Paris, in order to survive, it's not bad to speak French. So most of them probably do, but it has become completely normal that all of these discussions happen in English, and it doesn't happen anymore that somebody doesn't dare, for example, to ask a question in French. It just you need to be very consequent and you need to be very persistent. In the beginning, it's odd, obviously. I wouldn't start speaking Spanish to you right now. Well, we only would exchange 3 sentences, but apart from that, it must come naturally, it's true. You need to create an atmosphere in which people feel this is good for what I'm doing. And to be honest, you can play with that. We had some people who joined, or who felt, probably they didn't join for that, but who said, actually it's something which is great, it's a USP. I'm going to learn English kind of as a side effect in what I'm doing.
Yes.
And like you said, this is not the case in many international companies.
That's very cool. So going back to culture, I remember back this was a few years back, Capitaine Train back then was one of the first companies to publish their transparent salary grill. Obviously, the first startup that did that was Buffer, but Trainline, Capitaine Train was the first ones who did it in France and kind of established that trend of being more fair, more open, and it's also welcoming to diversity, etc. We also have, so that's transparency. We also have Jonathan Lefebvre, who maybe you guys know. He published this amazing Medium article on the obsession with customer service, who then turned into a book, very nice book. So that's customer support. So those are some hints into your culture. But can you just tell us a little bit more about?
It's actually quite an interesting point, because in Germany, per contract, you're not allowed to speak about your salary.
Wow.
So when I joined and I saw that that salary was completely public, I was a bit skeptical in the beginning. So Jean-Daniel had taken that decision. I think it was kind of when I joined. I think it was really helpful for the time. With scale of the company, you become a bit of a problem. Or you get a bit of a problem. Actually, I became a bit of a problem because I didn't fit in there. Because you have 5, 6, 7 positions in the beginning, and then what do? The country managers were the first. They were a bit commercial, but they were also a bit of marketing, they were a bit of product. So how do you put them in there? And how do you do that without making this unjust? What was interesting, at one point, we neglected it a bit, and what happened was that the teams, they came up with their own Excel table. Wow. And very sophisticated, once again, very smart people, very sophisticated formula behind it, calculating the salary of everybody.
Was it their own salary that they were calculating?
No, everybody's more or less.
Okay.
But it was completely transparent and completely shared. And I didn't have an issue with that, but I just realized, okay, if they're doing it anyway, then it's better to make sure that everybody has the access that they want. Obviously, I couldn't share confidential, and I would never share confidential information from the company with anybody else, not even internally with other people. But if they decide to do that among themselves, then why not? The only problem, once again, is the bigger you get as a company, the more specialists you have. And sometimes if you get somebody from the industry, you just have to pay them a different salary sometimes if you want to have them. And then it's becoming a problem. And then obviously once the M&A happened, or Trainline acquired Capitaine Train then, it was a bit different, because then you have 2 worlds and 2 cultures and even more, right? That you have to merge. But we're still trying to. Today, it's not the salary that is published, but for example, we have a certain number of levels across the group now that are completely transparent in terms of you can really read what is happening. However, what is interesting, and especially when it comes to fair payment also between men and women, right, which is a huge topic. It's always important to not only look at this, let's say, per department, per level, but also like that, right? Otherwise, you might miss something. So these are big learnings, and therefore transparency, definitely helps. Yeah,
and so what are the other values that you have as a company?
Well, there are very many. I think customer service is a good point. Jonathan, a great guy. He's also a good table tennis player, but in the end, I won. Important if he watches this. At one point, no, he's really a great guy. And we said in the beginning, especially, that customer service for us, together with PR at one point, are really the 2 elements that are not only serving for, let's say, the purpose of offering the best customer service. This is absolutely important. and definitely brings a value as such, but it's actually almost your image. It becomes a marketing tool, more or less, right? So a lot of people, and Jonathan describes that nicely in his book, and when they think about Capitaine Train, they think about the customer service, right? So this was and is really, really interesting. For me, if you then speak about value, it is definitely about respect. Which is super, super important for me personally, but also in general. The way that you treat people is the way you want to be treated.
Absolutely.
It is about trust, really, really important. Sometimes, once again, if you don't have all the information around a topic, you need also to trust that sometimes afterwards you might understand it, even though you haven't been involved the entire time because it wasn't your project. This is super important, and this is also probably something that with a number that is higher than 45, something that is coming up here. I think it is normal, it's important to talk about that, and I think the most important thing is appreciating feedback. It sounds a bit like a bullshit sentence, but it really, really is. I want to be surrounded by people who tell me what's happening, what's going on, and what they are thinking. And if you lose that, then you lose completely the connection to the teams, but also what is happening.
And how do you make sure that you get that feedback?
It is extremely difficult, you know. We have now people in our teams that qui me vous voient. You can translate that into English. Who say you to me?
They call you sir.
Yeah, I wish no, not at all. But it is really funny, right? It is people. I mean, we have a culture where you speak openly with each other, where you're just. You know, I try to be very approachable. So we have open office hours where people can come and see us. Not a lot of people do that, unfortunately, anymore, but you know they could. We have all hands where people can ask questions. But the bigger you get, especially for the new joiners, the higher that distance there is, right? There are some people who have seen me in the press for the first time before they have met me, and that is a barrier that is there. It's not within me, it is not within the teams, but it is just there.
And how do you manage that? How do you bring that closeness to your teams?
You explain that. You try to reach out to the new joiners. You take them apart. What I tried in the beginning, unfortunately, over the last month, it was a bit too busy to do that. I tried to have lunch with new joiners. At one point, it didn't work individually anymore, but with smaller groups, to just tell them a bit about what my idea of the culture is, what I'm expecting from them, but most importantly, to listen to them, what their expectations are. So these kinds of things, and then I really count also on the teams to explain to them how we function, how we work, and then to be honest, you have to prove it to them. Yeah. So as soon as there is an issue, we just had a case last week. Somebody made a spelling mistake in a newsletter. Person reached out, put it on the table, and was terrified. And I thought, okay, you can tell her now, yeah, it wasn't good, or you tell her, look, can happen, yeah, it's human, better next time. And that's what we did, and she was completely, it was a good day for her after. Yeah. And I think when people learn, okay, you can make a mistake, you can have your opinion, and it will only have positive consequences for you, then, the news will spread, and people hopefully will act in that manner.
Yeah, and so just going back to the evolution, it's interesting because you talked about in the beginning, so you were employee number 27, talking about when that moment when you're no longer able to eat around the table with the people, then I feel like the next step after that is not being able to interview every new join. Then at some point you don't know everybody's first names, and then you kind of just don't know many people in the company. So you've been through all of that. What is your advice besides everything you've just said, obviously, which is great, nuggets of advice? What was your top advice for CEOs managing international teams?
I think in general, regardless of international or not, you need to surround yourself with people whom you trust, who are a bit different than yourself. I think this is important as well. If you surround yourself with people that think exactly like you and have exactly the same opinion like you and just agree with everything you do, this is really complicated. In terms of international, I think what is completely underestimated, if you take me as an example, I never speak my own language. I mean, we're both actually not speaking our native language right now. And we haven't earlier when we spoke in French either. So I think what is really important, and sometimes people get annoyed when, let's say, somebody in a different language, it takes a bit longer to construct a sentence or to just to bring across what you want to express. This is super, super difficult. And to be honest, in Germany, one of my biggest strengths was my language, were my words. I arrived in France, and just to give you a very easy example, so when I want to make my point, what I did in the German language, I put it in a sentence, and then I used other words, but kind of said the same sentence. I tried that in French, only that I didn't know other words for that same sentence. So I basically said 2 times the same sentence, and people look at you like, what is he trying to do? It's a very easy example, but that was my tool of making sure that people understood this point was important to me. So it's tiny things, and if you put that the other way around, everybody has that. And you can't be annoyed in an international business that it takes a bit longer. And that sometimes you have difficulties to understand. And that sometimes, and this is really probably the most important advice that I can give, is don't assume. A lot of things in an intercultural business come from misunderstandings, nothing else. Don't assume that somebody intended to bring across something much stronger because just the language is stronger. Or because German, for example, it's a horrible language. When I speak in German in that sense, people always think we argue. And instead I said, hey, good morning, great to see you. It is really important to keep all of that in mind and just be very open, listen very carefully, and don't assume. Rather ask twice or triple before you really feel that you have understood what the other person wanted to say.
Okay, and going back to the values and what you were saying earlier, just have one thought about that. How so much of the culture of a company is a consequence of the leadership's personality. Because knowing you, Jean-Daniel, and the founders, like you talk about trust, and something you were kind of touching upon without really saying the word is integrity. And that, you can feel that with your teams, and you can feel that with the product. Like one of the things I remember that surprised me the most about the product is that your goal was to keep people in the product as little time as possible. Nobody wants to spend time booking a train. You just want to get it done. And so one of the first very big, bold statements that you made was, we just want people to get the hell out of here as fast as possible, book their ticket and get out. And I just feel like your culture is something that permeates everything that you do. There is a question in there, so but
yeah. Let me first just perhaps restate something that you said in the beginning. I don't think that our company is great because of the culture of the leader. I think this is important because you're a role model, but afterwards you bring in people that you trust. And I think the real culture of a company is due to the fact that you empower the people that have the right culture. And the more empowerment you give to them and the more they can create and bring on their culture, the better it is. So it's absolutely, in the beginning, definitely this is important, and obviously I try to think that it is important what you do in terms of frame setting, but in the end it's really all about the teams. Secondly, on the product, we have said that at times, and it's still absolutely the case. Very interestingly, so we talked about customer service, and obviously the sales have evolved ever since, as you know. And the problem has become more complex. So if we stick to customer service and product, which obviously is still among the topics that are in the heart of the company, because it's all about customer in the end, obviously. So for example, at one point we had a lot of customers, and that's still the case, just type in the email address very, very quickly. At times you had to register. At one point we open it up, so you could just book a ticket. And it is a very common mistake. And I'm pretty sure that everybody in this room, me included, have done that. You type in very quickly, and then you wonder why you don't get your confirmation mail at one point, and then you see, okay, I didn't do that right. So what do we do about that? Obviously, we suggest the right email address when we see, I don't know, I'm not making any advertising, but it's .com obviously, and the person typed in .co, so we advise .com. So this is still the case. So it should be exactly like you just said. The easier it is for the customer to book a ticket. And by the way, not only booking, this is super important. This is also getting the information around the ticket, but it's also about changing the ticket, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we all live in a world where we have to change our plans all the time. And I don't want to write to somebody in order to change my tickets. I don't want to, not even to cancel it, right? And that must be okay, because I want the customer to stay with us in the long term. So I will make sure that everything that is possible from a technical perspective will be made available. And we're helping the customer, but to be honest, we're also helping our customer service team, right? Because they will have one question less. So this is super, super, super important.
Absolutely. And just to go back on the transition from startup to scale up, we talked a little bit about communication, making sure the information flow stays the same. We talked a little bit about feedback. But what do you feel are the main points that are different when you're a startup versus scale up? Is there a point where you say like, okay, now we're a scale up? That's the first question.
That's different. I would still repeat the 45 was really important. And I mean, if you look into our world today, we're a bit more than 600 across 3 offices, so Edinburgh, London, and Paris. And we have more than 40 nationalities, perhaps to state that as well. So that gives you an idea. Yeah. We're really international now. Everybody, well, I think there are a lot of companies who say we're very international because we sell in a lot of international markets. I think that there's almost no country that we sell a ticket in where we don't have also nationality that comes with it, which is great, by the way, because then we have a lot of people in the company who become the customers. So it is complicated to say when this is really the case. I think one of the biggest things is probably what you said. You come in the morning and there are people that you don't know the name of, for example. That is a huge thing. That is odd. But that happens, and I think what is always important is to look ahead instead of looking back and say everything was so great at times because, that was a good time. But there were also things that were more difficult, right? So I think that's fine. In terms of scale, I think what is important, so I'm coming back to that culture point again and again, because it is really the crucial thing. Because if you have the right people and the right people who want to stay in that game and who want to develop it into a certain direction, and feel that this is their business, this is really important for me. Yeah? I don't want them to work for a company. I want them to feel that this is their company. Then you probably get there on your own. And at one point, it's not so important how big the company actually is. But, and this is really something that I would have probably also encouraged a bit differently, even if it's the best person in terms of content or in terms of expertise, if the person feels that the culture fit is not there anymore, the person, you should almost encourage the person to leave. And this is something that, for example, I found very hard, because for a long time, for example, it was the perfect culture. And from one day to the other, it's a bit exaggerated, but let's say over a few months, you realize it's not the perfect fit anymore. And then you're not doing the company a favor, but to be honest, at the same amount, you're not doing that person a favor either. And it is hard to lose a very experienced person, but for the good and the well-being of the company, and to be honest, of the teams most importantly, because if you have somebody who comes to work and is pissed every morning just because he's there, or she, then you're not helping anybody. Yeah? So that, I think, is important, and that is really important in order to scale a company. And that was for me also the moment when I thought, okay, apparently there has been a shift in culture, and you just have to accept it.
Yeah, it's make a parallel usually in this point of, employee retention is not something to be followed blindly. Sometimes people, they serve a purpose in your company, and then the purpose is no longer there, so you both have to move on. It's the same with love relationships. It's not because a relationship ended that it was a failure. It's just it was the right time at the right time, and now it's not the right time anymore, right? So that's an interesting point, the one about how different people serve a different purpose in your company. But besides the people, because we're talking about startup to scale up, okay, in terms of the team, but also we talked about in terms of objectives. It's a different thing, and in terms of growth, in terms of ambition.
It's a very important factor. It's the way that you evaluate what you're doing. Yeah? So let's call it KPIs, a key performance indicator. Again, sounds like something not that important in the first place, but it really is. So let's say your key performance indicator is year-on-year growth. Yeah? In the first year, because you have nothing, you open a new country, you make 3,000%. You say, wow, it's wonderful, sounds amazing. But it's on a very low level. When you are at a certain level, and the growth obviously becomes smaller, it might be only, let's say, 100% of growth. And it looks pretty shitty next to the 3,000%. And your graph, probably in terms of, marginal growth, then looks something like that, which nobody wants to see. But it's still a great achievement. So you have to ask yourself, perhaps, this particular KPI is not the right thing to look at anymore. So it's really important to ask yourself as a startup, first of all, what do you want to achieve with your startup? Yeah? What purpose are you trying to, or what is the purpose of that startup in the first place? And second of all, when you scale it up, and especially after, it can be a C-series, but it could also be an acquisition, or something else. But it is really important to then ask yourself that question: what are we trying to solve for? It's really important. And by the way, for me, one of the key performance indicators was also how happy is the team. So after the merger, we have spent a lot of time, we called that a mood chart, where we went through the entire team and asked ourselves, how are they doing? Have we heard anything from them? Have we spoken to them? We tried to make sure, the team was quite big already, but we tried to make sure to speak to them regularly. Whom, for example, did we feel that we could kind of take on the journey with us, and whom did we feel, okay, it's just not the thing for them? So these kinds of things is really important. So ask yourself, are you tracking the right things? Because otherwise your KPIs can all be super green, but actually you're not hitting the target that you're trying to achieve with the business.
Very important. And glad you brought up the acquisition part. So tell me a little bit about that. When Capitaine Train back then was acquired by Trainline, you had been there for 2 years at that time.
One and a half.
One and a half. And how was that? How was that transition?
A lot of work. A lot of work. So first, one thing that is important, so when I joined, we were called Capitaine Train. We didn't say that, but one of the first actions that John and me took to internationalize a bit, we called it Capitaine Train.
Yes.
So that at least there weren't 50 spelling mistakes every time somebody outside of France tried to type that into Google.
And by the way, you were the first of the Captain Train, because then we had like Captain Contract, Captain, there were so many captains after you guys.
We should have trademarked that.
But you were the first, yes. Go ahead.
Thanks for remembering that. Yeah, true. So that was the first thing, and then well, first of all, it takes quite a while to get there, right? So you talk to them, you ask yourself, do you have a project in common? And that was the case, from a commercial side, but also from a cultural side. So we spoke a lot to the CEO, Claire Martin, who's still the CEO of the group, and saw did we have enough cultural things, for example, in common that is important. So we had a long discussion about that. And at one point, you come to the point to do that, and then you try to explain the project to the teams. And I remember that wasn't always easy, and that wasn't always easy in Paris, but it wasn't always easy in London either. And I think sometimes that has been a bit forgotten. And then in the beginning,
what wasn't easy?
Well, once again, you are, I think at times we were 80 people in Paris, and from one day to the other, you're 500.
Okay.
And the autonomy, and what I said is really important to me. You try to empower people over years, and they can pretty much decide everything that they have in their hands themselves. And from one point to the other, it is completely different, right? You need to make sure that, let's say, your counterpart or somebody who does kind of the same thing from the UK side is involved. You need to think into a bit of a bigger picture. Obviously, we brought together the platforms, then we rebranded, all that kind of stuff. And step by step, you feel that it is less under your direct control. But it's not a bad thing, because in the end it's good for the company, because you see on other sides that something is going much quicker. Obviously you see much more customers coming in and all of that. But it is, in the beginning, it is just a cultural change. And nobody likes change. It's completely human. And you can say, no, you have to like it now. Or you can say, okay, it's human. Humans don't like change. So you have to try to accompany them. And all of us, and by the way, it was the same for me, and it was definitely also the same for Claire, that this takes a while to get accustomed to that. And in the end, you have to concentrate on the things that you can do together and that work out. but it isn't always easy.
Yeah, and you make a good point, because we are obviously working in technology innovation companies, and we feel that by definition people who join these companies love change, but it's actually, not too much change, especially in France. I guess it's part of French culture.
Yeah, I think in general, but also what you shouldn't forget is, let's say you run a company, you have a certain purpose, so you decide what you want to do, right? But there are people who join the company for this particular job that they want to do, and that's completely okay, right? And and then you tell them from one day to the other, oh, by the way, your job is going to change a bit. This is completely normal. That this is something that takes a while to understand, and also then to make it your own. Because once again, I wanted, and I still want, the people to stay, but to really explain to us how their job works, rather than we are imposing, this is how you have to do your job.
Yeah, and so at that point, after the acquisition, Jean-Daniel, the original CEO, co-founder, leaves the company. You take the role of president of Trainline International. So what does your role entail today? What is your day-to-day like?
So I'm responsible for the Paris office and for the stuff that goes around that. And actually we have a lot of positions within Trainline. I think it's a good idea where you have a horizontal and kind of a role over the company. So one of my roles today is I'm responsible for the supply for the group outside of the UK, I should say, but so on the group level. And I think this is helpful, because then you understand, me personally, what is the topics that we need to change in the international business in order to make sure that that we meet the needs of the Parisian teams, or let's say of the international teams, because to be honest, today we shouldn't think in offices, we should really rather think about what is international, what is UK, and even there it is, you have customers that come from the UK, travel to the UK, and then to mainland Europe. And on the other hand, what is on the group level important, let's say, for supply in my role? Yeah.
Just before we move to the next point, do you have any lessons learned that you want to share on the acquisition to any entrepreneurs who are potentially getting acquired? Do you have any advice to share on that point?
Well, one of the advices is, until the money is not on the account, it's not on the account. Because usually it doesn't work out. So let's be just completely honest. And my wife always said it's a roller coaster, and it really is. You never know until the very end if it's going to happen or if it's not going to happen. And you should prepare for that, and you should invest everything you can if you want it to happen. But you also need to be prepared for the option that it doesn't happen. And let's be completely honest, most of the time it doesn't happen. And I think you can never be that sure until it's all signed and all paid that it's really happening. I think this is really the biggest lesson I learned, and it takes a whole lot of energy. I've never worked that much in my entire life to get there.
Yeah, I mean, that is true for anything. It's the same we say for fundraisings. Till the money's not in the bank, we don't open the champagne.
Exactly. Don't spend it before you really have it.
Yeah. And just before also we close, you wrote a piece about AI in the rail industry, and of course I can't have the president of Trainline without asking you, what do you think is the future of rail? What are the next challenges and the technologies that you see out there that could be implemented?
Yeah. Well, I think if you think about rail a bit, right? Rail has one big disadvantage. It's the psychological barrier that a lot of people have by taking the train. It is because they do not always know how to get to their ticket, but even when they're on the train, they don't feel in control. It's different when you're on a plane, you might not feel in control, but it seems so abstract, you're going to trust the pilot. When you're even in a traffic jam, you are on your wheel, but you feel you're in control. You might be stuck for 2 hours and not move a centimeter, you're in control. When a train is 5 minutes delayed, be it on the train or on the platform, you're super annoyed. What are they doing? How is that possible? So why am I saying that? Because artificial intelligence can help with that. Yeah? So we have some examples on big data, on crowdsourcing and stuff like that, where we do some interesting stuff. So just to give you one example, we have one thing that we call BuzzyBud. So there are trains in the UK, for example, currently that do not mandate reservations. So we ask people when they are boarding the train to just say, how full is your wagon, for example. Yeah? So, I don't know, are there empty seats or not? And a lot of people doing that, so therefore when your train arrives, you already have an idea, what wagon should I take, or should I wait one more train in order to find an empty seat. You know, these are small kind of things, but everybody talks about big data, and you know, and so it's something very tangible. So that's good. The future, once again, to come back to the point, what can we do in order to make sure that this barrier gets reduced as much as possible, so that more and more people take the most sustainable mode of transport? Is definitely everything that is about virtual reality, augmented reality from my point of view. So let's imagine, because you might know how that works in France, but let's imagine you go to Spain and you want to take a train there, right? You might wonder, how do I find my train? Where do I get the information that I need additionally, unless you directly get it on your app? That would be the ideal scenario. But I would imagine in the future that, for example, you take a look into that station at home and you try to, you know, to find a bit of the points to orient yourself to get to the train. You know, stuff like that. And that would definitely help. Because once again, taking a plane, you know what an airport looks like, you know how to board a plane, but train in every single country is completely different.
Okay, so one last thing before we open the floor to questions from the audience. I wanted to talk about the little elephant in the room, which is the IPO of Trainline. I wanted to, you know, I know you can't talk about it, you can't comment it, you know, legally, but I really wanted to congratulate you and the whole team. We are so proud at the family because, you know, we've been part of the journey since, you know, the early days. So it's a logical next step for the company, and we're very excited for the future. And do you want to share about, you know, what excites you about the future?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. And to be honest, well, especially the Capitaine Train side, we wouldn't be here without you today. So this is really true. I just said that my first meeting here was 5 years ago when we met the Vice President of the European Commission. If we had called him, he would, you know, never answered the phone, never read my mail. And thanks to you, we had access to these kind of people. You were involved in our B series and before, so thank you. We are one of the reasons here tonight is also to appreciate that and to thank you for that. The future, well, first of all, on the IPO, what I can say is that this is really testament to an absolutely great team. And I think this cannot be said enough. We wouldn't be here without this amazing team. And because we spoke about transparency, I think what is important and is really something that I'm super proud of is that everybody gets shares, right? So everybody in the team is now shareholder. And coming back to that idea that I want that the people feel this is their company, absolutely underlined. So this is important. Future. I think we all have one big challenge ahead altogether, which is everything that is about climate change. Yeah? I think we all feel it, but this is really important.
Especially tonight.
Yeah, but I personally am very happy, to be honest, to be working for and with a company on a project that helps in that regard. Yeah? So when I look myself into the mirror at night, I think, okay, this is helping the environment, and I think we all need to do something in that regard. And I think that making sure that more people can take a train definitely helps into that regard. Personally, I'm very excited about the liberalization coming up. Yeah, so in France, that's going to happen over the next couple of years. So I don't know if you've heard that, but Trenitalia has announced that they're going to run trains in competition. Flixtrain has done that, and in Italy, for example, it's already the case. You have you have two big players now in the market, and then, for example, Trainline, in that case, it's great because you can compare both. But what's really interesting is you have more and more people taking the train. You see that on routes where you had almost no trains before. Now there's high speed plus more options.
So it's going up?
It's going up.
Wow.
So more and more people are going to take the train, and that's something that I'm absolutely delighted about, that it's going to come to France, but also to other markets in Europe. So there's much beautiful stuff that we can do about that.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Please give a warm round of applause. Thank you.
Que la famille.